All right, this is the Big Douglas Show. We're excited to have you watching with us today. This is Opposition Wednesday. So, those of you that this is the first season for the show, every Wednesday we have somebody from the opponent come on, talk to us a little bit about what we should expect. So, we'll switch a little bit away from fantasy football and get back into regular old football. Today, we do that with Mike K. Mike, I appreciate you hopping on today.
Thanks for having me, Doug.
Absolutely. So, congratulations in order. Not the Eagles beat writer only, but with PFN now you're covering the entire league, right?
Yeah. I'm their lead NFL writer. Been doing that since right before. Actually, the Combine was my first weekend with them. I covered the Eagles for 4 years. Before that, I covered the Jaguars for 3.
And I'm curious, what do you think are some of the differences between, obviously there's more names and numbers, but is there something about covering the entire league that you like better than just one team?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's an interesting challenge, right? I mean, I think from my perspective, I like seeing how the chicken and the burger and all that stuff is made in every single different kitchen, right? Like, so I've always been a fan of football in general, and so having covered 2 separate beats pretty in depth, I know the differences. I mean, Philly's a very different market than Jacksonville and vice versa. And I like being exposed to more people. I love talking football. If you ever follow me, I mean, my Twitter handle's right there. I love talking football. I'm not afraid of a good discussion. So it's been fun. I love beat writing, but it's been fun to kind of spread the wings of the content, as it were.
And I get that. Let's see, I want to get to the division, but before we do that, I'd love to talk to you a little bit about, and I read the piece that you had out on USFL players that are trying to make it onto NFL rosters. Tell us a little bit about those guys, and do you think that there's an inevitability that the NFL will partner with somebody to do something like a minor league system?
Yeah, I'll answer that first question or that last question first. I think it's inevitable. Yeah, I mean, I think the XFL wants that. I think the USFL definitely wants that. I think the way they're celebrating NFL signings is a little different than the XFL and the AAF because they were able to make it through a season and they're still they're still in business. So it's interesting to see that and how they've used that as an advertising strategy. But yeah, look, there's 39 guys from the league in the NFL. The XFL had a bunch, the AAF had a bunch, but most of those guys were in training camps or on practice squads right before that started. So it wasn't really like a second chance. These guys are guys that weren't on practice squads for the most part last year. COVID kind of curtailed their ability to get on rosters, and that's why they were available when they were for the draft. But what I'll say is this, the Commanders have paid a lot of attention to the USFL. They sent scouts regularly. Johan Neal told me that when he signed his contract, I think he was the second or third guy from the USFL that actually signed. He and Channing Stribling, who's now playing corner also for the Commanders, he told me that they paid a lot of attention to the spring leagues. You got to look for every advantage you have. They've since signed 4 guys overall. Devontae Bosby, who I covered in Philadelphia for a little while. Those, and they signed an offensive lineman who I'm not even going to try to pronounce his name because I will fail miserably. But yeah, it's very interesting. Some guys are ending up on the same teams. The Bengals signed 2 guys from the Houston Gamblers, and they're kind of bonding over the experience. And listen, look, if it doesn't work out, they end up back in the USFL, and maybe they get another shot again. Sure. When you care about this career and, covering athletes as long as I had, there are some guys that just will not be told no. And I think that that's what makes them so endearing as underdogs, right? We're getting ready for the preseason. I'm sure there are a ton of Commanders fans who are nostalgic about guys who used to be on the team, didn't work out, and now they're getting another shot, right? I mean, you remember guys that, a running back who just didn't work out for whatever reason, and now he's back in the league with whoever. And
AP Ryan.
Yeah, right, exactly. So like you're watching this this drama unfold. Everybody loves Hard Knocks, but the real reality show is the preseason, in my opinion. I'm one of the few people that really likes that last preseason game because I like that's why I got in the business. I want to tell the stories of people who don't really get much of a voice. And so I'm very excited for this preseason because I've been exposed to even more players because of PFN's training camp tour, which I handled the Northeast wing or leg on. I'm sure we'll talk about that. But outside of the NFC East, I checked in with the Baltimore Ravens and the New York Jets. I've also gone to the Commanders, the Eagles, and the Giants. And then I'll be going to Nashville next week for Bucks versus Titans joint practices. But, this USFL thing, man, especially after the momentum they just gained, a lot of people didn't pay attention to the season, but once you see guys that are starting to legitimately make it to the league, I think they're going to have a lot of momentum next year when they compete with the XFL 3.0.
Did Dijon say anything about, because I remember him coming out, or Dijon, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right.
Dijon.
When he came out, I remember thinking, this kid could play a little bit. Did he say, did you talk to him about what happened there and the disconnect between where I think a lot of people thought he'd end up in that draft, inevitably in the USFL instead?
I think going to Shepherd and probably being that small school guy,
right.
I covered for a while Trey Sullivan, who played with him for a few years, and he kind of got overlooked for a few years and then bounced out of the league. And we kind of talked about that. I think some guys, you just get lost in the sauce, you know what I mean? And that's a line that Channing Stribling gave me. But sometimes, when you're a guy who's an undrafted free agent, sometimes you take a call and you get an offer and then that offer falls through, or you want to look for a better fit, or the only guys that want to sign you are teams that view you as a camp body. So it's like there's a lot that goes into it. He went to the XFL for a little bit, did not really play. And so this opportunity with the USFL really helped him kind of springboard. But you can check that out on Pro Football Network. We've got it posted. And
I'm going to share the link when we're done.
It
was a really good read. All right, let's jump over to the NFC East for a little bit.
Sure.
Let's start with the most important position on the field. How do you kind of rank these quarterbacks in order?
I would say Dak all the way up. Dak's easily the best quarterback in this division. It's not close. Then I would probably put it at a pretty solid tie for several different reasons with Hurts and Wentz, and then Daniel Jones is probably at the bottom. And what's weird is like I've covered Jalen Hurts for 2.5 years. I've covered Carson Wentz for 3 years. I've been to a few practices for Daniel Jones. I was a big fan of Dax as a college player. It's just such a weird trajectory all these guys have been on, right?
It is.
Wentz obviously, blows out his knee after having one of the best seasons in recent memory, and it's a shame. I said this. I was at Washington camp, and I was talking to some other writers, and I just said, look, Carson's the most talented quarterback I've ever covered. It's not close.
Right.
Physically, he is incredibly talented. Mentally is where he kind of has to figure this out. And I think Jalen Hurts is kind of the opposite. Mentally, I've never covered a guy who's sharper. You can knock his arm, you can knock his temperament in the pocket, but from a mental standpoint, along with his dual threat ability, he is tremendous. If you combine the two guys together, I think you'd have a top 5 player. But the reality is it's not that,
Yeah, I get that. And it's odd about Hurts because I've always liked him since college. He feels like a gamer, but also it feels like when you call a guy a gamer, that's not like the world's greatest endorsement either. Like it sounds like it should be, but generally guys that are gamers are struggling to be starters. When you mentioned the mental aspect of the game, is that Carson not putting in the study time? Or is that more about how he relates to teammates? I'm curious about that particular comment about his.
Sure. Ron Rivera talks about processing, and I think that's what it is. So, he's got a great work ethic. Carson's not a guy who, skims things. He does care about it, but I think his natural inclination of being a gunslinger, I think his tendency to fall back on his heroics, right? He wants to be Captain America. Did you ever watch Generation Kill on HBO? Okay, so there's a character that they call Captain America because every time they go into battle, he goes nuts. He gets very dramatic. He's basically like the world's greatest superhero. Like, that's his attitude, you know? Like, the music is blaring and everything like that. That's what Carson Wentz is. Carson Wentz wants to play hero ball. We've all seen maybe the best throw I've ever seen in person, the throw in the back of the end zone to Miles Sanders where he just weaved it at FedEx. I mean, that one's hard to forget, right?
Yep.
Every now and then, he will make a play that maybe 2 or 3 other quarterbacks on this earth can make. And that's the allure of Carson Wentz. Right. The issue is everything else, right? Like, 2020 was an abject disaster. They were dumbing down the playbook for him to process quicker. It just was not working, according to several sources I spoke to.
And that was what the new coaching staff, if I recall right.
No, this was with Peterson.
Okay.
And it's just like they were trying to make things better. The offensive line wasn't doing that well. The wide receiver group wasn't good. I mean, there was a lot going on there. It's not all Carson's fault, but I think something that Colts fans realize also as well is, like, at this point in his career, he needs a lot to go well around him for him to be successful. Like, you look at the Indy numbers, they're terrific, but, like, in situational football is where he struggles. And I think processing mentally in those struggles is his issue. Look, I went to camp. I spoke to a couple of people that really raved about his leadership. I think he does have some issues with relatability. You got to remember, this kid's from North Dakota. He's used to being the most athletic guy around. He's used to being the Michael Jordan of North Dakota. And then he goes into a locker room with people from different backgrounds and different football experiences and life experiences. I mean, look, we all have friends who don't relate to everybody outside our friend group. I mean, like, that happens. So I do think there is like there's this rush to gang up and mob on Carson, but I also think some of his shortcomings are extremely understandable based on how he grew up in the game. And what he's been through, because he's been through some catastrophic injuries. Imagine being the guy who locks up the NFC East in a first-round bye and then has to watch another guy win a Super Bowl. Then he comes back the next year, struggles, tries to push himself, breaks a bone in his back, and then watches that same guy lead the Eagles out of a hole to get to the playoffs, win another playoff game. And then he comes back when, Foles is gone and he implodes. So it's like he's been through a lot. And then you look at Indy. I've been covering the league for over a decade. I have never seen a front office kill a guy's character publicly the way that Indy went about.
It was odd.
It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen, and there's got to be more to it, but it's just like, I was surprised they got what they got for him with the Commanders, but the Commanders seem all in. Ron Rivera has seen him up close quite a bit throughout his career, and he clearly still buys into him.
Well, I'll continue to say I don't know where his body is now and where he's at mentally, but of all the quarterbacks I've watched come through the NFC East in the last 15, 20 years, and that guy scared me every time we played him because he just pulls something off that make you, pissed. Is this the best collection of weapons he's had?
No question. Johan Dodson, in my opinion, has the highest upside of any wide receiver in this class. Before he entered the NFL, I did an interview with Sean Clifford and Trace McSorley. You can check that out on PFN. And they called him the natural. This guy, from the second he stepped on the turf at Penn State, was a guy who could make plays. I mean, he was outperforming guys that were much older than he was. His pro day, I thought he answered questions really well. I thought he ran routes really well. He's a guy that I can see legitimately being a force for the next decade for the Commanders. And look, Terry McLaurin, I know he's never made a Pro Bowl. I know that there was talk about the extension for a while. that dude is a baller. And I mean, he's a special player. I think they have to figure out Logan Thomas. I think they have to figure out the running back situation. But I do think this is their offensive line is nowhere as close to as good as the Eagles have been during his career. But I would say from a passing weapon standpoint, at least at the wide receiver position, it's definitely the best duo he's had.
Will Tyrod Taylor end up being the starting quarterback for the Giants by the time the year's over?
It's starting to feel that way. That's the feeling.
It is. Everybody just got it wrong on Daniel Jones. I mean, there were a lot of people that were really high on Daniel Jones. I remember Jay Gruden was all in for Daniel Jones, and we know what happened there. They took Haskins, but there was a lot of buzz for him. Hadn't panned out. What do you think there?
I think he was used really poorly early. I think Jason Garrett, I think Pat Shurmur, two guys who are more passive passing game coordinators, right? Like they're not doing anything that you haven't seen 100 times. Daniel Jones is a sharp kid, but I think he's an enigma still, right? He's an enigma entering year 4, and the Giants were absolutely correct to not pick up that 5th-year option. Does he still have potential? Can he still be a starting quarterback in the league? Absolutely, but I do think he's probably going to need a change of scenery to do that. I think we see this all the time, and the guys get drafted early, and then they freeze up or they don't deliver. And then they stay where they are, and then they get demoted or they become backups. And if they were a 3rd-round pick, you'd be like, okay. Or if he was a top 20 pick as opposed to a top 5 pick, right? There would be a little bit more leniency. And I think, we're seeing that with Jalen Reagor in Philadelphia, right? Like if this guy was a 3rd-round pick, you'd be like, okay, cool. Well, he's making progress. He's a rotational wide receiving threat. But that's not the reality of the situation. The Eagles passed on Justin Jefferson for him. And he was taken in the top 25. So, I think for Daniel Jones, maybe he has like a Mitch Trubisky type trajectory where maybe he has to go somewhere and be a backup for a winning team. And then maybe he can go find his, redirect himself somewhere else. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, Kurt Warner did that multiple times. We've seen other quarterbacks do it as well. Marcus Mariota is now a starter in Atlanta. He had to go to the Raiders even though he threw the ball once last year, apparently that was enough for them to bring him in, so that happens sometimes. And look, Jameis Winston's a starter again. So sometimes you have to
I forgot that Andy Dalton was down there in the Bayou. Yeah. I saw that today on the presser, but will Jalen Hurts be the quarterback for the Eagles next year? Are they in on Jalen Hurts? Their weapons aren't bad. The defense should be pretty good, but they got a lot of ammunition to take a quarterback next year. I'm curious where you think the team will the team win enough games this year that makes it all but impossible to move on from Jalen Hurts? I guess is the best way to put the question.
So I like that question because I think it's more nuanced. I don't think it matters what happens in the regular season. I think it matters what's in the postseason to them. I think if they don't make the postseason, then that's all you need to know. If they don't make the playoffs, it's done.
Right.
But I still think so last year was his audition. Now he's got a callback, right? And that's what this season's about. Okay. They've surrounded him with all this talent over the last 2 years. Quez Watkins has developed. Devontae Smith's developed. They bring in A.J. Brown, who he targets like a bajillion times in practice. The running game, they've had guys develop. Kenny Gainwell's a really interesting player. The offensive line, they've made repairs to. And then they've backed those repairs up with young talent as well. They're very deep on the offensive line. And look, Jason Kelce came back. They've set him up for success. If he can get them a playoff win, I think he's definitely in. I do see marginal improvement. I think he's throwing the ball more accurately. I think he's more efficient. I think he's seeing the middle of the field significantly better. That's been very apparent. He's also throwing the deep ball a lot better. I think he really trusts A.J. Brown. I think this is going to be a really good marriage for them. They're best friends on and off the field. It's hard not to feel good about the Eagles right now. Part of me is kicking myself because this is going to be a fun year to cover for Eagles beat writers, and I'm out here covering the entire league. I think it would be hard for them to not win 9 games. I think they win 11. I think they win the division. I think the Commanders are being slept on a little bit. I think they could overtake the Cowboys in that number 2 spot because I love this defense. I love Ron Rivera's defense. I like what Jack Del Rio is doing with this secondary and this front. And if Chase Young can come back like Chase Young, I think they're going to be very good.
I got a couple more things I'd like to ask you about the Eagles. I have first of all, they had a great offseason. I mean, way up there at the top, and they're rolling it, and I respect them for what they did. I hate them for taking my Bulldogs. As much as I'm a Commanders fan, I'm a Bulldogs fan. So let's talk about a couple of them that you drafted, starting with the big man up front, Davis.
Davis is a big human being, and I don't know if you can say it enough. I mean, you know that. I think with him, it's going to be an early down situation sort of thing, but I don't think he is. Like, a lot of people talk about he won't be a good pass rusher, which I find to be bogus.
It is bogus.
This dude's got quickness off the line. He can bull rush the crap out of you. What's funny is he's the type of guy that guys like Jason Kelce struggle with. So, you're seeing those viral stuff of him and Cam Jurgens. He's a guy that can really overtake a smaller center. And I think he's a guy that he'll be a momentum sack guy. I think he'll be a guy that you'll see get like 2 here, 2 there, 0 here, 0 there, 0, 0, 0, 0, 2. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think you're drafting Jordan Davis to be a sack machine. I think you're drafting him to kind of allow everybody else to be sack machines, right? Like, if he's taking on 2 guys up front, you're going solo with Josh Sweat, who can beat you off the line. You're going solo with Fletcher Cox, who, by the way, is still a very good defensive tackle. Javon Hargrave's a Pro Bowler. Brendan Graham still has some juice left. He's actually looked great during camp, believe it or not, coming off the Achilles. So he's a people mover. And I think the number one thing, and I'm sure you're going to ask me about Dean, when you watched all of Dean's highlights, like, you remember when he fell and like the next day NFL Network was basically doing around the clock Nakobe Dean footage. Mm-hmm. If you watch that footage, every single play is Nakobe Dean cleaning up behind Jordan Davis, because Jordan Davis has moved an entire pocket to another stratosphere and he's just cleaning up. That's really special. There are like 3 guys in the league that can do that. And I think if he reaches his potential, I think he can be one of those guys that gets around 7 sacks this season, and then you call it a huge bonus. Because if he's a 3-sack-a-year player and your other guys, you have 2 other, 10-plus sack artists, I think you feel pretty good.
No doubt. And frankly, that's about usage. Because if the team wanted to use him as a 12-sack-a-year guy, I'm telling you, he could do it. They kept him on a really low pitch count at Georgia, and that's because, I mean, look at all the guys that were around, so it was a little bit harder. So I'll be interested to see how many snaps he ends up getting per game. Of course, the other guy is Dean, who did 5th round for Dean, 6th round, late. Was it that high? I don't know why I thought that he went later. Your thoughts on him, and where do they have him playing, first of all?
So he's he's like a deep reserve Mike and Will, which is what I've kind of projected him to be. So nothing's really surprised me, but I think a lot of people are disappointed that he hasn't immediately overtaken TJ Edwards, who in my opinion is one of the most underrated defensive players in the league. They also signed Kaiser White, who's playing mostly Will. They like Sean Bradley. They like Davian Taylor, a 3rd-round pick from a few years ago. They've invested a lot in linebacker for a team that doesn't seem to care about paying for linebackers. So he's taking it one thing at a time. You got to remember, he fell because of the shoulder concerns, but he also fell because he's undersized. I mean, he's an undersized guy, and you've got to find the right role for an undersized guy. It's like having a 5'8" wide receiver. They can work, but you have to figure out what they do well. And I think Nakobe's going to take a bet.
What is the plan at cornerback? Will does somebody traveling? Are they going to set on each side? Have they decided yet? I know we're still early.
I don't think they've decided, but I do think there'll be sides. I think Slay will be left and Bradbury will be right. But it depends. Maybe they seem to switch stuff up based on game plan. Sometimes Slay will travel with the number one guy, and then Bradbury will just freelance. I mean, they're in a good situation, right? Where they've got a really good nickel corner in Avonte Maddox. Their safeties aren't very good, but when you're playing as much zone as they're playing, I think you're okay.
This has been a fantasy segment all off season, so I'll ask you, who do you prefer in fantasy football, A.J. Brown or Dallas Goedert?
A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown's going to run away with these.
He's going to get a ton of usage this year.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Jalen Hurts has struggled with tight ends his entire career. Okay. He did much better last year, and he looks a lot better this offseason, but I think you can't take the outside. He really likes throwing to the sideline, and A.J. Brown wins on slants, but mostly he's been winning on goes and fades.
If the Bengals were the surprise, like out of nowhere offense last year, who will be that team this year?
The Jets.
Really?
Yeah, I really like what I've seen from Zach Wilson. You want to talk about tight ends? Buy some stock in Tyler Conklin.
Okay.
Yeah, he's got that A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts connection with Conklin, and they're going to run a lot of 12 personnel, which, that San Francisco offense, that style of play works.
Yep.
I think they're going to run the ball extremely effectively with Breece Hall, who is running like a man possessed. I know that idiom is used all the time, but that's not a trope. That dude is just like on another level. I like Michael Carter a lot. I think Corey Davis not being the number one wide receiver is a good thing. Garrett Wilson's going to take some time, but Elijah Moore seems like he's really about to take another big step. And look, they went from having nobody at tight end to having Tyler Conklin and CJ Uzomah.
Who do you like as the early favorite for the MVP this year?
I'll just bet on the constant winning horse, Aaron Rodgers. I mean, I know it's a cop-out, but here's another one. I think Lamar Jackson is going to be in that discussion as well. I really
big year for Rashad Bateman, don't you think, this year?
I'm sorry?
Big year for Rashad Bateman this year, don't you think?
Yes. Very big year for him, but I think Devin Duvernay is going to have a very promising season as well.
All right. Love that. So let's wrap with this. Get back to the NFC East. I think it made it sound like if picking today, you'd guess Eagles, Commanders, Cowboys, and Giants. Is that how you see it?
Yeah. Yeah. I think the Cowboys are due for a come-up year. You know what I mean? Like, it feels like they've always been one or two the last few years, but they're dealing with some pretty notable injuries. They didn't really do anything in the offseason. It was mostly subtractions. I think they've greatly undervalued Amari Cooper. We don't know how Michael Gallup's going to come back. Dalton Schultz I think he's going to have a great year, but he's going to have to be the guy. He and CeeDee Lamb are going to have to be the guys. And we haven't really seen them be the guys for a sustained long period where everybody studied their tape, everybody knows what to expect, and they're going to be the guys. I also, it's been a pretty quiet offseason for Dak too. So, excuse me, but we'll see if Dan Quinn's defense gets figured out after last year, because last year he called a heck of a game plan. Now people know what to expect. There's really not a lot of new ingredients there outside of Dante Fowler. So I'm intrigued by what happens with Dallas. I think they'll be second or third. I think the Commanders and Dallas are going to be head to head throughout the most of the year.
At last one, what do you think? We get closer to MVP Carson or closer to the end of last year Colts Carson for Commanders fans?
Tell me how the offensive line looks. Is the offensive line making it through?
It was a top 11, 12 unit last year. I don't think that losing Sheriff makes them appreciatively worse. I'll say this, it's a misnomer that the Colts had a really good offensive line last year, right? I mean, they did, and they had injuries. So certainly they should be better than the unit last year. Norwell shouldn't be a huge drop-off from Flowers. And we're whether it's Schweitzer, it sounds like they're going to give Turner first crack at right guard.
Yeah,
So
that's the way it sounds.
could be, I mean, good, right? Good.
Yeah,
good
I mean,
enough.
I think he's going to be middling.
Top 15-ish, right?
I think the expectation here is so low that he's going to be able to eclipse it. I just don't think you're going to be able to say next year, like, hey, this dude's the dude. You know, he feels like, I'm trying to think of a comparable situation, but like, you know, Baker has constantly had this underlying, like, is he the guy? Is he not? You know, sort of thing. I think that's what Carson's going to have to deal with until he really leads a team to a playoff win, to do something in the postseason. Because, like I said with Jalen Hurts, it doesn't really matter what you do in the regular season. If you're not making the playoffs, it's a net negative. And so if he can get the Commanders to the playoffs, I think that's a really great start for him. He couldn't do that with a Colts team that was, in my opinion, extremely talented, and just fell off a cliff. He's got to show. I mean, this is all about him proving himself. That's what this Commander season is.
Mike, this was fantastic. I'm so glad we were able to get you on today. Appreciate it. I'll link all your stuff to the bottom of the show information.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Doug.
Appreciate you.
Have a good one. I think my mouse broke.